folks that don't use AI in the correct way, right? Don't use it as a drafting tool, not as a final marble, elegant sculpture.
Love it. I think that's a really good lesson. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Sales Performance Podcast with UHubs. And this is your destination for expert insights and thought leadership in revenue growth and go-to-market strategy. So today, I'm delighted to introduce another special guest in this transformation series. Today's guest is Dan Cummings, who is PrecisionAQ's first ever Chief Commercial Officer. And Dan brings over a decade of experience in commercial strategy, business development, and go-to-market operations, many of which is honed in the life sciences and pharma sector. Dan's journey spans leadership roles at the likes of Envision Pharma Group, Capsule Pharmacy, and Syneos Health. And Dan's experience blends startup agility on the 0 to 1 journey right the way through to enterprise scale execution. So today, whilst leading PrecisionAQ's mission to redefine how biotech and pharma companies navigate commercialization, syncing strategy, evidence, access, and patient outcomes into one seamless offering. Dan, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Matt, and good to see you again. It's been far too long. I'm absolutely excited for the conversation today, and that intro makes me sound pretty good. But I gotta say, in the end, I'm just a guy that's ultimately ruthlessly focused on the customer and what we can do to make it easy for them to work with us. And easy for our team to work with them. And that's my simple mission every single day.
Love it. And I'm sure we'll unpack that mission into some principles and learnings. You and I are recording this late July 2025. It's an interesting time to be leading a revenue organization and to be building go-to-market. So Dan, it's been first 100 days. Perhaps it'd be great to learn a little bit more about the organization, and then if you can help us understand what those first 100 days have looked like.
Yeah, absolutely. So PrecisionAQ, I always say it's a bit of a coming home story. And Matt mentioned my career, but I could do 3 arcs into my career. I learned how to think as a management consultant in life sciences market access, both at startup employee 5 of a company and at a bigger firm. I then said I want to learn how to operate. And so I ended up at a company called Inventive Health, went through a liquidity event, eventually became Syneos. But I learned how to operate on the behalf of other executives using the strategic mindset I built in the first arc of my career. And then I said I want to be able to operate and do strategy on behalf of my own decisions, not on executives' decisions. And so I went to a startup to gain that agility, that ability, still always in a go-to-market and commercial lens. And now I'm here at PrecisionAQ. And really what I simplify PrecisionAQ down is it's all about empowering access for all. This is a service-based company that owns an agencies, it owns consultancies and HEOR firms, and it owns data products, and that's true IP. And so if you take that all together and I say, hey, this company empowers access for all for life sciences companies, it's really simple, right? Essentially what we're doing is we're making sure that we can drive access not only to patients, but to payers, to providers, and capital. And we've purposely pulled together an amalgamation of companies over the last 12 years to allow for that, across those vectors of agency, consultancy, HEOR, and then data products. And in the end, what Precision's allowing and focusing on is taking companies from someplace to someplace across the product continuum, everywhere from phase 1 to phase 2 to regulatory submission, and ultimately to growth and LOE. And we have solutions that can sit in each one of those. And that's the exciting part about the company is it's a map. It's a kind of a puzzle piece. It's a chessboard that you have to work through in a way that's thoughtful and sequential. You have to build a go-to-market motion. That is, I'm not everything to everyone, because most folks don't want to sign a 30-year mortgage, a connected, integrated deal. And rather, they want to hire the painter, the carpenter, the plumber at different points during their build process as they move from and to. And that's how I look at PrecisionAQ. Another beautiful thing in coming to Precision is I get to test a go-to-market model that I always wanted to, a modern one that's driven by AI and people, where the AI makes people force multipliers. I use AI every day myself, a variety of different solutions, and now I'm entrenching that in the process components of how we ultimately grow this business in a repeatable and predictable fashion. The first 100 days, first 100 days at PrecisionAQ, I have this concept of day 1. And what day 1 to me is hard to explain, and so I'll explain what day 2 is. Day 2 is indecision. Day 2 is lack of health. Day 2 is lack of rigor, laziness, biases, not being curious. And so day 1's the opposite of that. It's grit. It's relentless execution. It is this maniacal focus on what is the root cause of the client's problem and how can I solve for that. It's thinking ahead, right? Thinking further ahead and ultimately putting the client at the center. And it becomes so important in that first 100 days that I've been here is doing the work. One of the things I joke around as a chief commercial officer is I get to oversee the whole funnel of new business acquisition. That's from marketing, drive qualified inbounds, to lead generation inside sales, drive qualified meetings, to sales, hunt pipeline, harvest pipeline, right? Support the farming of pipeline. And even our proposals like function, which is how we communicate our solutions to people, right, to get them to procure our products and solutions. I need to make sure that proposals is increasing our win rate. And if I can do all that with a wraparound of sales operations that gives me the data to drive repeatable and predictable growth, and I can connect all that, right, every single day and do that work, that's the bar. That's the expectation. And that's why I get quotes back, my first 100 days that we were beyond impressed, right, with your proposal. Your experience with name your therapeutic area and how you're thinking about name your asset is why we have to choose you. I want to hear that every day. And that's not an expectation. That is what we need to strive towards. And so that's my view, man. The first 100 days in PrecisionAQ is all about doing the work. I'm the manager on proposals. I'm a lead generator. I'm a sales rep. I am sales ops data wrangler. And I'm also the guy forward-looking 6 months from now, thinking about where's the next wave of commercial spend and how can I make sure I get ahead of that and own it in the value and access and space in which we play with clients always at the center. So it's quite simple. It's just always day one. Every day. I'm just going to beat that.
I love it, Dan. And I always think context is important to these conversations, right? And so many of the leaders that we have on the show and obviously leaders that we work with at UHubs are private equity backed, and they're going through this transformation journey that has often been brought about by multiple acquisitions that you're trying to plug together as well. When you talked about that offering that you have at PrecisionAQ, has that help us understand a little bit more about the context? Has that been like an acquisition path? Have you brought different organizations together so far on the journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that's interesting is the founders of this company are serial entrepreneurs. They founded multiple companies, and this is the third one. PrecisionAQ, right, the company that I lead as the chief commercial officer from that remit, is part of a bigger company called Precision Medicine Group. Precision Medicine Group has two arms. The commercialization arm, that's where I sit, right? We help make sure we can get drugs into the hands of patients. That's commercialization. There's also a research and development that has labs and a CRO, or clinical research organization function, that exists very much moded in rare disease and oncology. And that's purposeful and precise play on words with precision. And what's interesting in building out Precision Medicine Group and PrecisionAQ in particular, which we'll talk about, is very purposeful to say, where is the market going and what do we need to do to make sure that we can enable that market to get there quicker? And the answer all centered around access. And so over the last 12 years, we've bought agencies, and the single largest and most impactful agency in the access space. We have bought adjacent agencies to empower how we can support clients holistically in medical communications and call it advertising. We've acquired consultancies that can now not only create the content which agencies do, but support the strategy and support it both from a deep expertise on the drug channel and pricing to creating health economic and outcomes research deliverables across the globe. And then we wrap that all around with proprietary data that we have access to, and only we have access to say not only can we create the content through our agencies and tell you which content could be the most impactful through our consultancies and HUR forums, we can actually measure the impact of that content as it goes out into the field, as it goes out and interacts with HCPs, patients, and everything in between, payers, and understand where we can tweak up, where we can tweak down, and where we're missing. And no other company can do that. So it was very purposeful, right, into how we approached our acquisitions, and there's been dozens over the last 12 years. And the interesting piece to all of that, which is like, why now? Why am I the first chief commercial officer? In private equity-backed companies, the reality is there's earnouts, right? And you have to dangle the carrot for the founders and the entrepreneurs that run these agencies and consultancies and data products. And now that we're at a point of our growth trajectory, with the backing of Blackstone, we're at a point where it's time to come together. It's time to think about the company as a aggregate solutions provider. And how do we approach the market then from that lens where we can bring people across the product continuum? And that's why I'm here today, right? Rather than having many small groups doing go-to-market in silos, which is how these companies tend to start. And I think that's the right way to go. We're now in the evolution of creating connectivity to drive scale, to compress action, to drive cross sells, and all the things that your classic private equity houses are ultimately saying on their sheets when they think through these deal structures.
Totally. Yeah, that's really helpful just to paint that picture of the journey that you guys have been on and how you got to where you are today. I hear that word so often, Dan, in conversations I have with chief commercial officers at private equity-backed companies at this stage, is the vision is to create this unified go-to-market where everybody is singing the same language. Easier said than done, right? Because quite
Yeah.
often you're bringing together salespeople that have baggage or history from maybe one products or service suite. You're then trying to get them and educate them to a unified way of thinking. So help us understand, like, as part of your first 100 days, like, what have you done from a talent perspective so far in unifying the team?
Yeah, I love it. I think the biggest thing is right from the get-go was setting a 30, 60, 90, right? Doing the simple stuff. Within that 30, 60, 90, spend your first 30 days. I met over 200 people in my first 30 days and codified what I had. I had specific questions I asked to understand where they are, where they're going, and what their views are on go-to-market. Right. Some of those questions even were so simple as asking if you had a magic wand and you were chief commercial officer, what's the number one thing you would do today and why? Right. It unlocks where their brains are, how big or small you're thinking. And there's no right or wrong answer. In that 60 to 90 days, it was all about the MVP build of the team, assessing where, from a talent perspective, there are people that understand and how we're going to move at a day one type of mindset. And then ultimately how and willingness to use systems to move even quicker. And then at that 90-day piece, it was institutionalizing a strategy. And so what I did, and it's very simple, is I listened, I distilled really quickly, and then I created a strategic and operating model that I could get everyone coalesced around, because a bunch of teams, and to that end, there was 5 teams that moved under me that reported to all different people. That doesn't mean they're connected. That's just an org chart. I had to connect them. How do you connect people? You set a vision. You set a mission. You set your standards of performance, right, of how you achieve that mission and vision. You set an actual strategic plan, which I like to set my strategic plan using 2 different tools, what I call boulders, right, and then what I call OKRs. And my boulders are, what are my big, beefy things that are going to be true for years to come? We're not going to accomplish them. Rather than setting strategic goals bottoms up, many pieces of sand and pushing them up a hill like many companies, I like 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 big boulders. Then within each of those boulders, I set sprints every 3 months, right? They're called OKRs, objectives, the what, the KRs, how you measure it. And the KRs are key results. They're not actions. Nope. They are true measurements. And a great example of that I'll give you is in lead generation. Have to fully transform that team. A key result for them is demonstrating a run rate of driving X amount of qualified meetings in a single quarter, right? That is their key result. Their objective is creating the systems and having the right people and the right process to ultimately achieve that. And that all falls up to a boulder. And so that has been my play. You set the vision, you set the mission, you set your standards of performance, your non-negotiables, and then you set your strategy and your operating plan. Measure it every week, hold your leaders accountable to it, talk about it every week, and evangelize and institutionalize it not only with your own team, but with everyone. My final hack, and this is something I picked up in my startup days, there's such power in doing a Loom or, a 2 to 5 minute video about things that you're doing and sending it out to your peers on your executive team or joining your peers' LTs or leadership team syncs to bring people along. Instead of showing them at the end of 6 months, here's a Ferrari, I want to show them here's a tire, right? Here's some paint, and here's a steering wheel. And get them talking about what's going on and ultimately excited. The last and final thing, this is my hot take. The easy answer I've seen in private equity-backed companies is move anyone that does any type of sales-like role under a chief commercial officer. I think that's too simple, or simplistic is probably a better word, because by doing that, you're pulling the lifeblood, the muscle of the company to be hungry for growth out of the P&Ls. And by doing that, your P&Ls just become delivery, and that's a different connotation of a group and a different culture. And so I'm more of a fan of keep the specialists, the solutions engineers like folks, the consulting partners, the agency account executives in the P&Ls. And then build an overlay on that is going to give you additional upside that you wouldn't have seen because that person's not constrained by a P&L, right? It's not constrained by also having to deliver work. And you create a matrix model of influence and accountability that ultimately allows you to grow faster and in a collaborative manner to achieve the North Star mission of easy to work with, easy to work for.
Boom. I mean, there's 3 awesome hacks there. I'd love to just unpack those one by one if you're up for that, Dan. And
Let's do it.
couple of questions. There's awesome stuff, and perhaps we start off just very quickly with that that team structure point you made as the third one, and then we'll work our way back up. So
Sure.
you talked there about having that matrix model and making sure that you're not pulling everybody who could be revenue generating or contributing to the revenue number out. The key question is, how do you make sure that there's a healthy relationship between, in the professional services world, like the delivery and the practice teams versus the pure sales guys? Because I hear this
Yeah.
all the time, right? There's a bit of contention there.
Yeah.
There's a bit of butting heads. What have
Um,
you seen work on that side of things?
but I'll tell you what I like to do, and I can't go into too much detail because proprietary, but here's what it comes down to. Data and incentives. That's simple. And what I mean by data is if you can actually define the battlefield, where you are working today, where is there white space, and what's the definition of white space? Within that white space, where do we see naturally what I'm going to call inline teams or people that are in the P&Ls naturally expand to, and where don't they? Where they don't, where is there a logical hypothesis where we see we win a lot at a high rate versus another comparator set? And where do we have pipeline today versus losses today, and what does that all mean? So if you can get that forensic and build bottoms up by pharma company, because we sell to pharma and biotech, by brand, by indication, then you can create clarity. Because I can say to Matt, sales rep, Johnny, Jane, marketer, this is where I need you to focus and create that clarity on the other end. So that's number one. Number two, in incentives, a bias to pay does a lot for a culture in the early days of creating a influence and authoritative go-to-market model that is both directly under a CCO and indirectly influenced by a CCO. And so I think there's a lot of power in saying the most important thing is we do what's right by the client, and incentives are solved on the back end. That unlocks so much opportunity. The last piece, and this is my plus one caveat, I call it a deal desk. And what a deal desk is, for my definition, there's many, is someone that has to understand the story arc and how it drives differentiation and connectivity that goes and meets the client's ask and goes beyond the client's ask for all proposals that go out the door. Proactive, reactive, RFIs, RFPs, everything in between. And by having me in the trench that I have to read every single one, it's a lot of work. Don't get me wrong. It's the boring work, candidly, that you got to do. I can work with all the different pitch teams that have mixtures of people from my crew that report directly to me and don't, and actually challenge beliefs and flip the script from looking internal. What about my P&L? Who gets credit? Who gets the shiny star? To external, what's best for client X and why do we believe that? All right, help me understand. So those are my three first on how I've approached it overall.
Yeah, nice. And I think the big takeaway there is using the data to make it irrefutable. Like using the data to prove to the team where they should be spending time and how that working dynamic should exist between delivery
because how much do you hear
sales.
in your experiences? Oh, I feel good or I feel bad, or we win here all the time or we never win here. And then you look at the data and it might be a different story. So I'm ruthless to using data, not to say that's 100% truth, but let's start from the data or the best available data.
Yeah, I love it. The second hack you shared was, which I love, is that startup mindset of MVP rather than, waiting until you've done all the work and you put all the hours in to ship the outcome or the final product, bringing them on that journey. I love Loom's a great tool. I think there's some great insights there around what leaders, but also team members can learn from. The first hack, I think, is a super important one that you spoke about in terms of goal setting, Dan, because I really see a lot of leadership teams struggle in the absence of having a structured approach to goal setting. And this kind of leads me on to a related topic, which is you think about that private equity board and how you bring that board on the journey in those first 100 days. So if you wouldn't mind, like the boulders and OKRs approach sounds awesome, and I've seen it work so well firsthand with the OKRs structure, but how are you also using that in relation to your board reporting and managing?
Yeah, so here's what's really simple. First 100 days, I created 3 dashboards, and they're the only dashboards that are used not only by myself, but everyone that reports to me and everyone above me. There's one for sales, there's one for marketing, and one for lead gen. In time, they'll all be one connected one. So we all look at the same data. That data and the data points that we have on there, it's not hundreds of data points. That drives me nuts because then you don't know what matters. That's always the euphemism I use, and I've said this to a board. I could tell you about the number 5. 1 plus 4 is 5, right? 3 plus 2 is 5. 6 minus 1 is 5. Those are all different stories, right? And so let's actually worry about what the metrics are that matter versus just the metric. So we have 3 dashboards. That's number 1. Number 2, with the board, when I set the OKRs, those are the things that I give updates to the board to my peers, and then all the way down to the intern that just joined the marketing team. And so we talk about them every week. There is no meta roll-ups or simplification because I'm teaching my team how to write the one-liners tied to their key results, because this is not something they're used to. It comes more from the tech world. How do you write your one-liner key metric and not talk to me about all the activity you're doing? The activity I expect, that's part of your job. How are you actually moving the ball up the hill to achieve your boulder? And so that's the piece. Is I have a scorecard every week. You get an automated message in Teams. It says, hey, update it by this time. We have a review Monday morning on each of the OKR progress points across each of my functions. On that call is my direct leaders. My direct leaders then have calls with their team. They talk about how the OKRs, the progress points, and then what each person needs to do to drive that action. And then we have a wrap up every Friday. When I go to the board, I simply stoplight it and say, green, yellow, red, gray, right? Here's where we're at in each of these things. And then from my vantage point is I have commercial OKRs that go horizontal, and that's what I talk about. That's my focus every single day. To that end, the last piece, how do you hold your people accountable? You bring them together, you bring them in live. And so I'm actually hosting a meeting all about momentum in 2 weeks. And half the meeting is dedicated to institutionalizing OKRs and the concept of OKRs and where we're at in our OKRs, because it's all new to people. They haven't had this level of accountability. And then the second half of the meeting is, okay, let's train you up on what you need to do your job better to enable us to achieve our OKRs. So what's your takeaway, Matt? My takeaway is we talk about it incessantly in the same way with everyone. That's the play. That's the play that I like to use.
Love it. I think that's a really good lesson in terms of how to really get them trickling down, because where I often see difficulties and struggles is that a lot of time goes into planning and setting the OKRs, beginning of the quarter, each one, and then they kind of hit that mid-level manager or startup. So it's really, I love the way you talked about it, like talking to the intern about the OKRs, and it's like a constant communication up and down.
And I would say, Matt, I actually even pull even further. The OKR scorecard we have, that file, and I'm stealing from back in my startup days, and my old CEO did this with me. It is shared that anyone on my team can see it at any time. It's on a shared drive in a shared Teams channel. You can go in, encourage people to comment on it, and sometimes they do. It's the early innings, but ruthless transparency.
Love it. Yeah, I love it. And I think just the final piece on the importance of OKRs, I'm also hearing, where chief commercial officers are having pain or difficulties with their private equity board. It seems from my observation to be the chief commercial officers that aren't going with a system. They aren't taking their OKRs to the board. And therefore what ends up happening is the board end up imposing their ideas on the CCO, and that ends up being a very difficult situation to be in. So I think there's a great lesson there.
Absolutely. And I think to me, mental models and frameworks are important. Even in my first 30 days, I had to present to my board about the situation, what I believe. And I think, and this is how I presented, and I can't tell you exactly what I said, but I said, here are my functional observations of the business situations where they span from 0 to 1, 0, nothing, 1 MVP, across these types of situations: startups, turnarounds, accelerate growth, realignments, sustain success. Here's the North Star metric they need to achieve and where they are against that, right? And where we need to bring them to in the action. From there, I then was able to identify, what are the ultimate, immediate term execution risks that we need to work on, the midterm leverage points that I need to build for, and then my longer term strategic bets once I'm post day 90. And then took it a step further and said, here are my focused initiatives with intention that I'm acting on between now and the end of my 90 days. And then here's what you can expect next, the bigger things I'm working on for that midterm leverage point. And the boards, in the end, that conversation was really productive. And it was like, well, what else do you need? Right? How can we help you achieve that? Because you could see that we set the narrative and I placed my bets, and I was very convicted and still am in those bets. I've been in other boardrooms and when I was more junior, and I shouldn't have been in the board, but on behalf of executives where it was just that, right, Matt? The board was wagging the dog, right? And that is a tough place to be as a chief commercial officer, and not somewhere that I'm hoping I ever land. Always open to a good knife fight.
Yeah, no, totally. Well, look, it sounds like you set a really strong foundation and off to a really good start first 100 days. So I'm sure there's lots of success to continue. I want to just circle back around. You mentioned something earlier in the conversation, Dan. You talked about the excitement at having this opportunity to build a modern go-to-market team and a modern go-to-market motion. And you spoke about two distinct components of that. You spoke about AI and you spoke about people. I'd love to jump into this. Obviously the timing of when we're having this conversation, pretty much every conversation I'm having is with chief commercial officers, chief revenue officers, of trying to help them figure out what their AI strategy looks like. How are you thinking about that as you build this modern go-to-market function?
Yeah, it is foundational to the entire process of thinking about. And so I will tell you, day 2 on the job, I created a quick Loom to show folks how you could stand up a lead generation campaign with, instead of months, in under 30 seconds, right? If you have the right inputs using a standard LLM, right? And so that is how I'm thinking from. That's just a vignette example and evangelize that. To that end, the reason why I say people and AI, you have to be really thoughtful, and I'm biased. I'm someone that's built AI agents. I'm someone that has multiple GPTs that I've saved both for my personal use and for business use. I'm someone that advises AI startups, right? I'm someone that wants to be as close to AI as possible because I look at it as my version of my generation's internet. Right? I think the AI operating system is coming. I look forward to that. I have people on my team that are afraid of AI. I have people in my company that have not played in that AI arena. And so why people in AI is important is if you just say AI and don't bring your people along and jump too quickly, it's not going to have its aha moment. It's not going to create a fire of excitement. And it's not going to get entrenched as a way of working. It's going to be seen as a threat. This is coming for my job. And so that's my just thesis. How did I test that thesis in my first 90? That same thing I did day 2 on the job in lead generation is I sent it around to some executives. But then I went and met the lead generation team, right, who's hasn't had an opportunity to learn modern ways. And I showed him that and then sat down and said, give me your reactions. What questions do you have? And we had a really thoughtful discussion that spanned from, is this going for my job, to how the heck can I do that? And then I showed them how to do it. And then I actually taught them to fish and said, in the next 48 hours, send me back a campaign, right, using AI with your own mindset, because that AI is going to get you a rough draft. Right? You need to take that from 60% to 100. And now you have more time to do that. Send it back to me. And then I iterated with them constantly. And so now my lead gen team is obsessed with using AI to write first drafts, and they know how to do it. That's a win, right? And that's just one example of many. Where I'm pointing AI right now is, I would say, is content creation and derivatives of that content, first draft iterations. And then the biggest thing where I've seen AI have a massive impact is business insights, especially external business insights. Many, many moons ago, 15 years ago, that's what I was doing, right? Like pulling, hey, we're going to meet with client 123. Can you pull the investor deck? Tell me what we do with that client, if anything. Tell me what their hot buttons are. Can you look at the latest analyst reports? Can you tell me what Q&A, key hires, what's the upcoming catalysts? How much funding do they have? All that stuff. That used to take me a day, right? 15 years ago. I can use Perplexity and do it in 30 seconds, 10 seconds, right? With a standard kind of prompt. I can do it internally with my data using the type of AI that we have access to here, which is one of the big players. And so now I've created a business insights function that is a virtual assistant, for lack of a better term, or the zeitgeist of an agent, right? An agent that sits next to every one of my sales reps, every one of my marketers, every one of my lead generators, every one of my proposals teams. And now I'm trying to evangelize them on how do you use AI every day to do this. And how do you evangelize that? I give them a series of prompts, because I've prompt engineered the heck out of things. And then I force them to show me examples and teach them to fish. So that's my play. I think the last thing is being in ecosystems of modern go-to-market folks. And so folks like yourself, there's other companies that I work with that I share, like, hey, what's the latest and greatest tech you're seeing to help with proposal generation? What's the latest and greatest tech you're seeing on sales coaching? What's the latest, greatest in tech you're seeing on sales operations, data, and insight gathering and testing, all of that stuff?
Yeah, I love it. You made a really interesting point around the team response to AI, which is that some of them are fearful. And I think this definitely backs up what we're seeing in the market right now, Dan. So there seems to be a real widening of the gap between certain higher performers who have completely embraced AI and are leveraging the tools that are being put in front of them. In some instances, we're even seeing examples of salespeople building their own GPTs and workflows, which is awesome. And they're benefiting from the productivity gains as a result, right? What do you do about the fearful team members, the reserved ones, the ones who are perhaps not leaning into AI? And, we're seeing a couple of different categories of these more Luddite sellers, shall we say. I think one of the pushbacks that we're hearing from customers a lot is they feel like AI is cheating, which is an interesting kind of cultural one. And then there's obviously like the job displacement fear that's in the back of the mind for quite a lot of commercial roles as well.
Oh, yeah. Good question. I think I'll start here. The most gritty folks that use AI use it correctly, but a lot of people are lazy, right? They don't read what comes out from the AI. They prompt something that's like, just tell me more about X. You're not going to get a great answer. And so I think that's what scares me most. Folks that don't use AI in the correct way, right? Don't use it as a drafting tool, not as a final marble, elegant sculpture tool. So that's number one. I think number two, for those that are fearful for AI, I think you pick the smallest thing that they do in their job and the smallest things that AI does well. Meeting recaps, right? And not meeting recaps if you have Copilot or whatever you have recording, but here's a prompt you can use to get a proper meeting recap that can hold you accountable, and try it out. Just try it out for the next couple of meetings to see how that goes for you. That's my place. I pick the smallest thing, the most mundane, obnoxious thing that's part of work, and say, just try this out and see how it goes. And then I check in, right? I check in constantly to break that barrier for folks to see AI is interesting. Like, wow, now I can be present on a meeting. I can read this prompt engineered note that comes out with action items and decisions and general notes that were taken. I can refine it slightly, right? Because I've gotten notes sent back to me and I'm like, AI wrote this, you didn't read it, right? Hyphens, it just has illogical, hallucinations. And that's how you get those folks that are scared to start to say, aha. And then we start to pull up channel to say, okay, that's core just being a business professional. Now let's start bringing it to the specialist that you do. So that's number one. Number two, in terms of I'm fearful for my job, I think that's I tried to change the fear. The better statement is, how can I modernize how I do my job? Just like folks had to when the internet came around. And your job may go away, but the better statement is your job may change. Boom. I think in the final thing when I'm thinking about AI and people is, do I believe that AI today could be your only version of a sales rep, an inside salesperson, a marketer, or a proposals person? In a services-based company like this to life sciences, where creative is as important as clarity? No, I don't. Do I believe that AI-enabled humans will win over those that are not? Yes, I do. And I would leave it at that point. I think there's an opportunity to spend more time on higher rungs of the ladder, using your brain in a way that's ultimately sharpening your differentiation and using all the things that AI can't know, which is your experiences.
It makes complete sense. And I think it backs up quite a lot of the opinion that I'm putting together on this space. Obviously, it's fast moving, right? And the improvements week on week are pretty crazy. But the analogy I was speaking with a customer about yesterday was ATM. Like when ATMs came out, there was like massive pushback from all of the tellers and banks that there's going to be massive job reduction. And actually, there's more tellers now than there was back there, but bank tellers do more productive work than they did before ATM technology was around. So we've seen shifts before, but this is a profound one. But totally love the way you're thinking about building out that modern go-to-market team and placing AI at the heart of it. Dan, this has been another amazing episode on the show. So thank you so much for coming in and sharing some really important perspectives on some really important topics for other chief commercial officers and leaders in the industry. For those who are listening to this, leaders, individual contributors who are inspired, would like to reach out and learn more, I'm assuming LinkedIn is a good place for them to do that.
LinkedIn's the absolute best place. DM me. I will answer any day of the week.
Amazing. Dan, thanks so much for the time. Really looking forward to sharing this conversation with the industry.
Absolutely, Matt. Appreciate it. And best of luck.